perspective of energy, where everything is energy, we understand that in our body we store energy, and trauma and grief and sorrow and pain and anger and frustration gets stored in our body in different ways as unresolved energy. So in a sound path, we use the vibration of the instruments to reach that unresolved energy and perhaps find a way to resolve it. Maybe not entirely, but we start chipping away at it and chipping away at it, which is the beautiful practice of sound healing, in addition to relaxing the mind and quieting the body and triggering the stress reduction response. It attacks that energy in ways that we can't even reach when we're doing talk therapy, because the talk therapy oftentimes re-triggers the emotion or re-triggers the trauma. So this way we reach it in a way that we can start finding harmony amongst that disharmony with the way the energy is stored in the body. With vibrational sound healing, we're using bowls placed on the body in different places, systematically focusing on ways to vibrate that energy in a more direct way, more direct than we can reach with sounds coming from a distance. The bowls are on the body and reaching us deeper inside. And what I discovered for myself, because we had a beautiful opportunity to be the teacher, the practitioner doing the service, but then we also got an opportunity to receive it. When those bowls are placed on the body, and how it really does connect to the energy and the trauma and the pain that exists within. And for me, it was most profound. And Niaje is the teacher of that program. And when she was explaining it at first, she was talking about where different energies are stored in the body. And for me specifically, she said she was talking about where grief is stored. And she said grief is stored in the lower part of the legs from the knees down. And at first, the logical mind of myself is thinking, well, why do I always feel it here? It doesn't feel like it's coming from my knees. So it's just me overthinking things as usual, or trying to make to be the to move away from that woo-woo space, right? It's stored in my knees? That doesn't make sense to me. My knees feel fine. It's my heart that's hurting in the grief space. But you know what? The proof is in the practice. And when we did that session, and Becky was my practitioner who was performing on me, it was so profoundly relaxing that the vibrations on the body itself, on the upper part of my body, it moved me into that bliss space in ways that I don't always get to when I'm doing yoga nidra or sound, but it moved me there. And it was that space of resting and awareness itself. And I could hear Niaje was teaching the practitioners as they were guiding through the body. I could hear her speaking, but I didn't get involved in what she was saying. I just heard it from a distance. But when she got to my knee, when she got to the first side of my body on the knee, it was like a shift, and I just felt that energy start to get chipped away. And then when she got to the other knee, it was like my whole body started twitching, and that was the signal that the energy was being shifted. The next day, that first day we did the front of the body, and the next day we did the back of the body. And when she got to the back of part of my legs, it almost made me it was so amazing, but it was also disturbing at the same time. I had trouble catching my breath. One moment, I felt like I was going to actually lose it. Um, but then as we moved through it, it found resolution and I started to feel better. And so that was a great testimonial to how we store so many emotions in our body. And whether we're doing a vibrational sound healing session, a sound bath, a coaching session, a meditation, a yoga nidra, we have the ability to get into that trapped energy and help find resolution for it. So that's why I really wanted to focus on emotion today, because I was in that space where I was unexpectedly recognizing the emotions that I carry in my body. And I do a lot of work on this stuff. Obviously, we do as practitioners, we do a lot of work on this stuff. And for me, as somebody who's been working on it since my mom's passing about a year and a half ago, and how much work I've done for it, it makes me really feel for those people who aren't doing the work, aren't doing any work with it. It's like, man, how are you carrying so much? I don't understand how you're even able to walk, knowing that I'm storing that much energy in my knees. Is like, how do you bend your knees to get through the day? So it inspired me to say, I really find that this is something we should be talking about, talking about. In our mindfulness practice, in all of our practices, we should be talking about emotion. Because as we study, as you've gone through, whether you've taken the Master Mindfulness course or the Master Sound course, we talk about intention a lot. We talk about gratitude and joy and forgiveness and compassion and all that stuff, which are all important pieces. We approach in the practice of radical acceptance how we need to accept our emotions, but we don't dig deep into it. We recognize that we're emotional beings, and in meditation, we should let the emotions come up and then determine what we're going to do with it. but we really should dig deep into it and be curious. And one of the keystones of our mindfulness practice is reawakening that curiosity that should always ask why. Why am I feeling this emotion now? Or where do I feel that emotion in my body? And what can I do to help resolve it? Because that's a signal that's saying if I feel it and I really look beyond where the expectation is that I carry grief in my heart, I probably could have dug deep and I probably would have felt it in those other areas. But I was just in that space of expectation that grief is always carried in the heart space, but it is also carried in other spaces in the body. So when we really focus on our practice and understand that, like it or not, emotions happen. Like it or not, we're emotional beings. And liking is an emotion itself, right? We like something. It's especially true to recognize in our journey of transformation, in whatever way we approach it, emotions are going to come up. And that's the key, is to become curious about them and explore them and understand. There are going to be doubts, there'll be worries, there'll be fears. And most of us are really good at avoiding our feelings or denying our feelings or only leaning into our good feelings or chasing after happiness or joy or the things that make us feel good. But our transformational journey to become more equanimous, to me, really focus on being more grounded in who we are, our transformation has to understand that we should be the observer of our feelings, not just the feeler of our feelings, but the observer. And that's where so many of our practices allow us to detach from the actual experience itself and see it from a different perspective as we sink into that bliss space in sound or yoga nidra or meditation and say, I can see it. I can see that feeling and I can get comfortable with the fact my feeling's ever changing. And sometimes I feel like I'm stuck in it, but that's my ego telling me that this is going to last forever because I know it comes and goes and it comes and goes. But if all we do is chase after the good and we try to keep ourselves here, when those things we label as bad happen, we crash down. And then we go back up and then we crash down. And we're going through this life going like this never ending feeling blissful and then crashing, and then feeling blissful and then crashing. And then we judge ourselves based on the fact that we're feeling a certain way. And that leads us into a place of shame or blame or regret or whatever else that triggers the stress response in the body, which is definitely not helpful. There's a great peace and a stability that comes when we get comfortable with our moods, when we become more resilient with our emotions, and we no longer define these things as good or bad. And we no longer tell ourselves that we are something, we tell ourselves that we are feeling something. And there's a huge difference there because what we tell ourselves becomes our reality. So we need to remember in our mindful place that we should be curious and open to experience what comes up. We don't resist or strive to change something for the sake of changing it. We should be with something to understand that it is part of us at that moment, but it doesn't define us. From deep down inside, we need to understand that we are the feeler of our emotions, but those emotions shouldn't define us. They no more should define us than my thumb does. My thumb is part of me, but it doesn't define me. My emotions are part of me, but they shouldn't define me. And so many times we tell ourselves we are this emotion. So when we focus on emotions this way and we understand that if I say something like befriending your emotions, how do we do that? It sounds almost contrived to say, I'm standing in front of a class, people looking for transformation, say, well, befriend your emotions. What does that even mean, right? But the truth is, and this is a Thich Nhat Hanh teaching, is we should befriend it, not because we want to be with it like we would our friend, but because we have to recognize that it's going to be there and we can walk alongside of it. So if somebody or something in my life continually makes me angry or pushes my buttons to make me feel a certain way, and I've tried to do all that I can to resolve it, and I can't, then I need to accept it. I understand that this person makes me feel this way, and I see it, and I say, that's what this person does. And then at that point, I make a decision. What am I going to do with that? Do I still have this person in my life, or do I need to move this person out of my life? Because if it's making me feel a certain way, is that something that I really want? But we don't want to analyze our emotions and obsess over our emotions. We want to adopt a quiet and calm, reflective stance of discovery. Why does this person make me feel this way? Is it something that they did in the past that I've been carrying on inside? And maybe I should have a conversation about it because it's a me thing. And that person might not even know what they said or did that is making me react or feel this certain way. So, in that space, we should befriend our emotions without judging them. We should recognize our emotions like we would a good friend. Without judging them, we accept them. We accept the fact that we're emotional beings. And so when I'm feeling a certain way, I should breathe into that emotion with that part of myself at this moment and understand that as I breathe into it, it's going to change as my perspective changes, like everything else does. So, accepting our emotions and the fact that we are emotional beings, we let go of the expectation of this emotion itself. So, again, in that space of grief or anger or frustration, I have an expectation of how I should feel in that space of grief. This expectation that I could read this book that says I go through these stages of grief. And as I go through these stages of grief, boom, it's done, boom, it's done, boom, it's done. I don't have to do that again. But you know what? They come up over and over again. It's not a perfect stairway that we're climbing, and they don't always happen in the order you expect them to. So the expectation thing is always going to lead us to that space of failure. So we want to let go of the expectation and we want to really focus on moving into that space of acceptance, accepting our emotional self, understanding that everyone has emotions, everyone has feelings, everyone. We don't all feel them the same way or at the same time, but our emotions aren't out to get us. In the same way, gravity isn't out to get us, but once we understand them, we can accept them and know that they're there for a reason. Gravity's there for a reason. It keeps us connected and grounded to the earth. But if we don't accept how gravity works and we step off the side of a building, guess what? Gravity's going to get us. But it wasn't out to get us, it was a us thing. And in the same way, our emotions aren't out to get us. But we tend to fall into this space where we feel our emotions are causing us trouble for no good reason. The reality is those emotions aren't there to cause us trouble. If we lash out at someone because we're angry, or if we shut ourselves away from a loved one because we're sad, or if we could quit doing things that we enjoy because we're stressed, or if we turn to something that's not healthy because we're lost or lonely or scared, those actions are what cause the problem. Not the emotion itself, but how I responded to those emotions. So the cause was I was feeling sad. The effect was that I turned to my old habit of going to eat a pint of ice cream. And that pint of ice cream for a moment made me feel better, but did it do anything about the sadness? More than likely not. In fact, it starts to trigger more emotions of the shame. Is like, why did I eat that whole pint of ice cream? And all of a sudden, this soundtrack in my head plays over and over and over again. So the sadness was the effect, but the cause was how I responded to that effect, falling into the old habits. But when we practice mindfulness, when we practice reaching that authentic vibration, we should learn to act in healthy ways in spite of how we feel. To understand that it doesn't matter that this feeling is affecting me a certain way. We should notice and observe and accept our emotions without allowing those emotions to dictate our choices. And that's what our practice is all about, creating this space between what's happening and how I respond to it, or how I'm not going to respond to it, or how I'm going to choose to meditate instead of reach for that pint of ice cream, or instead of get angry at this person who was pushing my buttons. When we reach our authentic self, we can get into that space where I can get angry and still carry myself with a bit of peace and calm. Or I can feel sad without moving into the space where I doubt myself or shame myself for feeling sad for no apparent reason. But it's a practice. We have to practice coming back to ourself. We have to practice reaching that space inside where we connect to our truth and our vibrational being and understand we are not always in a good space. We are not expected to always be happy. We should never expect ourselves to always be filled with joy. The joy is always there, but at moments we don't feel it. So we get back to that space where we connect with it. When we have an emotion come up, we should greet it instead of resisting it. We should be polite and non judgmental and breathe deeply into it and send some light into that space. And if it's a space that feels dark, then we focus on the fact that there is light there because we understand that through life, without darkness, how would we know what light is, right? Without anger, how would we ever feel calm? Without sadness, how would we know what happiness was? But if it persists, we should be curious about it. If it keeps coming up over and over and over again, and we continue to be graceful and breathe into it, then we should see it for what it is. We should see it as some kind of a road sign. We should remember that the emotion's going to shift, and more than likely it's going to move on unless we cling to it. But when we get comfortable with it, we can see it. And we can see it not as a directive, but as a message. So if the memory of somebody keeps coming up over and over and over again, maybe that message is, I have some unresolved issue with this person. Maybe I should forgive them, or I should reach out to them and speak to them, or tell them I love them, or thank them, or something. Or if it's somebody who's no longer with us and they keep showing up over and over again, maybe that message is, you know what? I'm still here. I'm still here. So that kind of maybe moves you out of that space of loneliness and helps you embrace the fact that you still carry them with you. But it's up to you to find that resolution. It's not me, but that's the answer that I found. What we really should focus on, and we understand in our practice, when we turn to gratitude over and over and over again, how that changes the perspective of everything. And so, how do we find gratitude for our feelings? There's a quote by Michael Singer that says, there are two ways we can live. We can devote our life to staying in our comfort zone, or we can work on our freedom. And that freedom comes when we start focusing on the things that exist in our life that we should be grateful for. We know that having an attitude of gratitude changes our whole perspective on life. When we're grateful, we open ourselves up to whatever life brings us. And when we're truly grateful, we let go of the expectation that abundance is going to come in a certain way. It might be an abundance of sunshine or an abundance of rain. It might be an abundance of birds singing, or it might be an abundance of, I don't know, rap music. We don't ever know how it's going to come, but it's going to come and it's going to show up. And when we embrace that, we can take a pause and reflect on what we're grateful for and how it connects us to this moment, and that gratitude of how my breath is flowing and how my heart is beating. When I focus on that, I find harmony because I know as my breath flows, my heart beats. And as my heart beats, my body goes. And that's where we connect to the harmony, that there is always harmony when you connect the breath and the heart. As your breath slows down, so does your heart rate. As your heart rate slows down, so does your body. So that's that harmony that we should focus on and bring us in that. And when we benefit from this space, it moves us into a space of calm, a peacefulness and contentment. And that's the space that we should find resolution in, not in that space of stress, because stress cuts us off from the most creative parts of ourselves. But when we breathe into that heart space, it brings our mind into that space where we can perhaps see a different path than we would when we're in that space of angst. The challenge, though, is to look for the good and find the gratitude all the time, even when it comes even when we're in that space of uncomfortable feelings. How do we find gratitude when we're in a deep space of grief? Or how do we find gratitude when we're in a space of anger? It's not easy. And unfortunately, most of us have spent our whole life, or most of our life, resisting these unwanted feelings, either pushing them away or ignoring them. So accepting them is hard enough. It's so hard to just accept them, but how do we turn our mind to be grateful for them? That's really asking a lot. But with practice, it gets easier and easier, and what we practice grows stronger. So once we understand it, we focus on that. Once I get to that place of understanding that I am an emotional being and I should accept the sadness for what it is, accept the anger, accept the good and the bad. So we just start right there. So just imagine for a moment, if you want to, go ahead and close your eyes. Close your eyes and just breathe into that heart space, if you will. And as you're breathing, you feel your body flowing and your heart beating. And then imagine you're out in the country somewhere. Imagine you're driving on a country road and you don't have your GPS because we're out of range, right? We don't have a map in our glove compartment like our parents used to have. We're lost. Just imagine you're lost. All the devices have no signal, and you're just getting worried because you don't know where you are. You kind of lose sense of direction because the road was kind of windy and the sun is behind the clouds, so you can't tell east from west or north from south. But just imagine as you're getting worried, someone comes along and you roll down your window and you ask for directions. Now, I know for guys that might be difficult, but you can roll down the window and ask directions. It's okay. You'd feel pretty grateful that this person showed up, right? Here's somebody that can steer you in the right direction, and you'd feel good about it. Well, just imagine our feelings are like that person. Our feelings are like that person who's coming along to give us guidance. Our feelings are here to give us information, maybe telling us something that we should know. But understand, our feelings aren't data, they're information. And we need to direct it. Remember, they're not directives, they're messages. They provide us information, but we need to keep it all in perspective. And we need to find our path, not based on our emotions, but based on our intuition and our heart. And you can open your eyes now. I should have told you that a minute ago, but that's okay. You were lost on that country road somewhere. It's all good, right? So when we see those feelings as a road sign, we get to decide what we're going to do with that, right? So if that road sign says to turn here to go to this place or turn here to go to that place, we make a decision whether we're going to turn that way or that way. So it's not a directive saying we have to turn here or we have to go this way. We get to find our path. And that's the exploration that we should focus on. So think about something like fear. Fear is a big word. Fear really does get a bad rap. But in perspective, we should see fear as a gift. If kept in check, it can be super helpful. But if we let it run wild, it can truly take over. And in our society, the peddlers of the fear are pushing in directions of separation. There are so many messages out there on social media, on the news, and in on the airwaves. The energy of separation is so good. How many messages are telling us to fear this person who doesn't think like us or act like us or look like us? Those peddlers of fear are pushing us in the wrong direction, and fear is taking an unnecessary space in our head. But if we focus on fear from a mindful perspective, we can see that fear is there to keep us safe. It's not a bad emotion. When we come in contact with something we should fear, like the old days, that fight or flight response is triggered because a tiger jumped in my path, I should fear that tiger and I should run like heck or climb that tree or fight. I'd run if I were you, but if you feel like you could fight a tiger, go ahead. Anyway, so trying to live a fearless life is a recipe for disaster because we would get hurt if we never experience fear. We should fear those crazy drivers out on the road. We should fear those people who don't really want us to be happy and successful. Fear directs us to see the danger for what it is. But if we lean into that fear too much, that danger becomes bigger than it really is. We lose the perspective of it, we lose sight of it. But fear will remind us not to drink milk past its 10-day expiration date, right? Fear will tell us not to take that medicine that doesn't belong to me. Fear will tell me to drive safely amongst all the crazy drivers. Fear will tell me not to go around that curve on a mountain road at 50 miles an hour when the sign said 20. That's the fear that's there for a reason. But we give fear too much credit in too many different ways. So we want to show that fear reminds us that there are consequences to our actions. Realistic fear protects us from the dangers of life. And when we move it in that perspective, we see it differently. Anger is another one that gets a bad rap, but anger is a gift, not a curse. Our anger tells us what we feel about life. If we get angry about something or we get angry about something that somebody said, it's moving us to say, I have a passion for that subject and I might disagree with you. We tend to get angry when our boundaries are crossed, and we should. That means getting angry can help us find out where that boundary actually is. It helps us define that space. If somebody crosses that line, I understand that that is a boundary, and maybe I should explain my boundaries more. It's a sign, right? Don't see it as a bad thing. As with all of our emotions, sometimes we get over caught in it. Sometimes we start spewing anger, and it's coming out from a place that somebody came along and pushed my buttons that released an anger that had nothing to do with that person because I didn't find resolution for it the first time. I allowed it to be stored within myself, and then all of a sudden Pam came along and pushed all these buttons, and boom, I got mad. And I said something at Pam that had nothing to do with Pam, but everything to do with something that happened in the past because I didn't find resolution for it or I didn't recognize it. But taking a mindful approach to anger can really help. When we notice our anger, we can use it wisely. By keeping it in perspective, we can let it teach us what's important to us and what kind of treatment we expect from those around us. We can help it guide us into this space that recognizes that I am passionate about this subject. I'm so passionate about it that your disruption has made me angry. Well, okay, that showed me there's a passion there. So that should be something I'm leaning into, but not to be confrontational, not to judge that other person harshly, but to understand that I'm passionate about this subject. And let's have a conversation about it. Something like guilt. We think about the word guilt and it makes us feel heavy. Guilt can really weigh heavily on us, especially when we continue to hold it from things that happened in our past. But yet, we can see guilt as a gift. Guilt can help us stay connected deeply to our moral compass. Because if we feel guilty about something in the same way we feel angry about something, it reminds us what's right or wrong, what's good or bad to us. It's remind us that we are a conscious being, that we do have a moral compass within ourselves. And if we stumble or act outside of our core beliefs or values, guilt is going to come up. It might hit us over the head. It reminds us of our own mistakes so that we can fix it. But it also reminds us that we should forgive. We should be forgiving. We should forgive ourselves. But guilt helps us make better decisions. That's that roadmap that is there. We just have to remember to keep it in perspective. Otherwise, guilt turns into shame, and shame is moving into a space of stress. Shame tries to tell us that we're broken or defective or worthless, and that's not true. So there's a difference between shame and guilt, and we have to recognize it. And we have to breathe into it. Think about the emotion loneliness and how it can sneak up on us, but it can be a gift too. It's rare that I would see loneliness as a gift, but if I stop and truly listen, I might find that I'm being asked to make a connection or to be reflective. Maybe it's time to reach out to a friend I haven't talked to in a long time. Maybe it's time to call an acquaintance who may become a friend. Maybe it's time to reach out to somebody I haven't talked to in years. Maybe loneliness is urging me to change my relationships, or it's telling me to work on a deeper connection with myself. Or maybe it's time to sit quietly and befriend a journal and start writing, or meditate, or exercise, or take care of myself. Perhaps it's that message that says, this is the perfect time to start a new course, or to learn something new, or to go out on a great adventure. That's what the message loneliness should move us into, instead of loneliness being that trigger that makes me go eat that pint of ice cream again, or the dozen cookies that I shouldn't be eating, or all that stuff that loneliness tends to put us into. We could go on and on. Sadness. Is sadness a gift, or is it a guide? If we're willing to embrace it and recognize it for what it is, but keep it in perspective, we can see that sadness is also reminding us what matters most to us. It's telling us what we want in life. It's reminding us that we have love within ourselves. Sadness will honestly show us that loss is part of life, but we can still live life to its fullest amongst the loss because we still carry that love within our heart. And that sadness is a reminder. Sadness is a reminder that my heart is still beating and that it's beating in that space of love. And if we lean into that sadness, it makes us feel vulnerable while at the same time shows us our strength. And there is nothing wrong with being vulnerable. Vulnerability is that opportunity to find our path forward. If we breathe into that space, it shows us our strength. That amongst the sadness, I opened my eyes this morning and I see that the sun is shining. Amongst the sadness, I got up and moved myself to do the things that I love to do today. If we breathe into it and listen to it, we start to see that sadness is a message that should show us our path forward. So instead of seeing our emotions as bad things, we should see them all as gifts. There's a reason that they're part of our life. Emotions are guides, and understand if we see them from a mindful perspective and we breathe into them and we don't let ourselves overcome into those emotions, we see that there's wisdom. There's wisdom in that sadness. There's wisdom in the loneliness. There's wisdom in the anger. There's wisdom in the guilt. If we pay attention to those things and we allow them to be there without resisting them or giving them too much power, we welcome them and see them as perhaps an opportunity to show me the way. Show me the way forward in my space of love. So, one of the most useful things that I found is giving myself an opportunity every day or most days. I'd love to say I do it every day, but I'd be fibbing if I did. But to journal, making a list of those uncomfortable feelings, we can start right there. Listing those things that we always define as negative and we start reflecting on them. So think about, you made a list of anger and stress and frustration and sadness and grief and guilt and worry and fear. And we try to find a reason why that emotion is something I should be grateful for. So maybe we just start with one. Start with anger and think about whatever made you angry that day. And then instead of focusing on the trigger, focus on why I should be grateful for that anger. Why should I be grateful for it? And be patient. Be patient if nothing comes up right away, but just start writing. Focus on one at a time or the one that you're focused on the most at the moment. And as we do it over and over and over again, we get better and better at recognizing that that emotion from a different perspective. Instead of always defining it as a bad thing, we can start to see it as a road sign that can move me into that space to find my directives from within, or that moral compass, or that guide to say, whatever it is I'm looking for. If we come back to it over and over and over again, we're moving that mind from a space of darkness to light, from that space of negativity to gratitude. And the attitude of gratitude changes our life in all ways, right? The cornerstone and foundation of this practice is the things we have to say to ourselves affect ourselves in a supreme way. There's so much power in our words, but not just the words that we say out loud, but the words that we say to ourselves. So before we make a statement, our words are thought. So if we truly think about it and we see that that thought is the catalyst for a series of actions and consequences, we should focus on, what am I saying to myself? Am I speaking love and life to myself, or am I bullying myself? And if I'm bullying myself or shaming myself, then what I'm doing is I'm cutting my confidence off at the knees and I move myself into shame. But the best way to overcome that is don't bully myself. Allow that thought or that dream or that gratitude to come over. Instead of moving into that space of negativity, I come into that space of positivity by focusing on gratitude. The other thing we need to stop doing is enabling ourselves. Enabling myself to react the same way over and over and over again. That auto response that we all tend to have fallen into. I want to turn that switch off. It's like a switch on the back of my neck, and I'm not going to respond to the things the same way as I did. So we have to stop pacifying ourselves with excuses and reasons why it's okay to give up on this thing or that, to slack off or not be consistent in my practice, to switch it and practice awareness of thought and listening with that mindful ear to ourselves. In mindful communication, we talk about how we communicate with others, how we should listen deeply with the from that perspective of learning about that person instead of responding to that person. Well, we should do the same thing for ourselves. Listen deeply to the messages that are there so then we can learn about why those messages are there. Why is that sadness there? Then while we breathe into it, we'll stop speaking those thoughts of shame or blame. We stop speaking those things that move us into that space of stress or doubt. We speak those things of gratitude and compassion, and we start to understand how silly we've been, by judging ourselves by our emotions, by dismissing our emotions that have been part of us from the moment we were born. Instead of denying the fact that we are emotional beings, we need to accept the fact that we are emotional beings. It's okay sometimes to give ourselves a swift kick in the pants when we find ourselves reacting the same way over and over again and say, you know what? I'm not going to do that again, and see it as a lesson instead of judging ourselves harshly by it. So before speaking something into existence itself, we need to breathe into it and ask myself, do I really believe that? Do I really believe that message that just came out in my head? Right? That's the path forward. And when we start doing that, then all of a sudden we're starting to manifest a more mindful life. We start treating ourselves with the same respect we would treat those we love with. We start giving ourselves the benefit of the doubt, and we start holding space for ourselves. If somebody walked into my space, somebody I love, and they told me they were sad, I would never tell them to dismiss that sadness. I would say, what can I do for you? Or I would just hold space for you, or I would hug you. But we don't do that for myself. Hug myself. I want to hug myself when I'm feeling sad. I should hold space for myself. I should let it be there, right? If somebody walked into my office and said they were angry, I wouldn't dismiss it. I'd say, what are you angry about? Where did that anger come from? And what do you want to do with that? So we become a coach for ourselves. If we want to transform our lives, if we want to transform ourselves, we need to treat ourselves like we would a client who came and sat across from us. Moving into that space of acceptance, because I am very good at accepting others. I'm not always so great at accepting myself. But if somebody came and sat across from me, I accept them, I hold space for them, and you know what? I allow them to be seen. And that's what most people need for just a moment. They want to be seen. They want to have you hold space for them. Maybe I should go to the mirror next time I'm feeling angry and say, I see you. I see that anger within you. Why do you feel angry? And what do you want to do with that, if anything? Why are you feeling sad today? Let the sadness come up. If you cry, cry. Man, I tell you, I say it in every class I teach. When I'm leading a meditation or a sound bath or something and I see somebody cry, I'm like, yes, the emotion came out. But I don't do that for myself. I should. When the emotion comes up, I let that emotion go. It's a shift in perspective. Treat ourselves as we would treat others. And then all of a sudden, what we think, we become. When we hold space for ourselves, we're becoming that mindful person. We're keeping ourselves in perspective. And then all of a sudden, we're starting to create a new reality that allows us to be more resilient. It allows us to be more agile. Because when it comes to the end of our life, the question's going to be that how'd you go with the flow of life? Did you resist it or did you accept it? Did you allow yourself to be loving or did all you focus on is being hard? And the hardness that causes suffering, it causes even more pain than any sadness ever would. So if we focus on anything, it's just that allowing ourselves to focus on the inner messages that we're telling ourselves, to understand that it has a motivation in the role and how we move through our life. It probably can help us understand our lives and ourselves even more when we become more reflective and more curious and more agile and more emotional. I'm an emotional being. I'm not going to cry today. Well, maybe I will, but not at this moment anyway. So there you go. That's my message for the day. Yay. All right. Anybody have anything they want to add? All right. Well, thank you guys for joining.
Take those
I
things.
will. I'm sorry. What'd you say?
I needed to take out those headphones. Can you hear
Oh,
me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Um, just listening to everything. It's been a while since we've had one of these, and I've missed them dearly. So thank you for being back with us. With the new moon just going by, there were in my life anyway, there were a lot of shadows and things coming up, and I think a lot of it had to do is because I was missing the connection with this group of people and other groups of people because life is happening all around us. And just listening to what you said, it just reminded me of my teaching career and that wait time and, really hearing the hidden messages behind what people are saying. And I was reading this lovely book,
Wow.
and this message came up, and it's very short, so I just wanted to read it. It says, "And always remember these things, my dear. Remember you have free will. Remember you are light, and so you shall remain. Remember there is no right or wrong, only divine truth. Remember that if you ask, you shall receive. Remember." And I won't go into that right now. That's a whole nother thread. That it just opened up such emotion, and it had to do with my mother. And reading that, just, I mean, I've done like a 360 since I started taking everything into perspective. So it is true that we're always there for everybody else, constantly, constantly, constantly. And sometimes we need to take that extra time for us, for ourselves. And today it was meant to be. When I saw that the topic was going to be emotion, I'm like, I'm there, because I already felt the shift. So that's what I
Awesome.
want. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. That's beautiful. It's true. And when I was when I originally had scheduled this class, I was going to talk about vibrational sound healing, but yesterday I was thinking I wanted to be the topic of emotion because I was in that space where I really wanted to talk about it from that of the experience that I had, not so much the practice itself of vibrational sound healing, but the thing that came up. And so I just switched the topic to emotion and I posted that yesterday and it's like, yeah, it's meant to be. Awesome. Yeah. So I'm not going to pick the topic for next week because I think by the time I get to next week, it might be completely different, right? So we'll just leave it at that. I think for the next couple weeks, I'm going to do these sessions on Thursday because my Tuesdays are we're doing these 4-day trainings and they're my Tuesday or we're still teaching on Tuesday. So if it's okay, we'll do it on Thursdays. But you know what? We'll be resilient. So maybe in a couple weeks we'll be on Tuesday, and then the next time we'll be on a Saturday. So anyway, all right. Stu, you have anything to say?
Well, I just want to echo what you said about this vibrational sound healing. It was wonderful. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
I have to make sure. It was wonderful. There was a lot of emotion. It was so great. And at the same time, it's like, oh, maybe I don't know. And I think Susan said it best. I don't know if I like that. It was a wonderful experience, and a lot of emotions do come up, but it obviously put most of us out. I know it did me. I was sleeping and hearing everything, if that's possible.
It is.
So
Yeah, that's the amazing thing about it. And that's really what we strive to get to in Yoga Nidra is being in that space where you hear and experience everything, but you don't really get involved in it. You just see it and let it be there. And it's really interesting that first day that we did it, I heard everything that everybody was saying. I didn't get involved in it, but you know what? I remembered it. And as a hypnotherapist, that's really the key to what we do in hypnotherapy is moving into that space where we turn off the overactive mind and that judgment mind that is in that space, whether I like it or not. In that space of bliss, we don't go into that space of identifying things as good or bad. We just see it for what it is, and it gives us an opportunity to see it from a different perspective. And isn't that what our practice is all about? To change the perspective on things and allow us to see things from a different angle. So yeah, so that was a beautiful piece of what we discovered there and what we teach in so many other places of change the tune. I like in a video that we play in the sound healing practices. This one teacher is talking about when we're going through our life. Back in the old days, the radio stations used to be tuned in, right? You didn't have digital; it didn't click on it. You had to turn it, and sometimes it'd be like and then you turn a corner, and you have to tune it back in. That's kind of how our life is. Sometimes it gets staticky, and we have to tune back. We have to have these practices that keep us tuning into the right frequency. And with time, we start to recognize that vibration that we should be tuned into, but we understand that life is going to pull us out of that perfect signal over and over and over again. So our practice of mindfulness and all these other practices that we teach are the practices that help us pull us back and reconnect to that vibration that we should be tuned into. And then the other thing it teaches us that we all have our own radio station, right? We should be tuned into that radio station. And, some people are FM and some people are AM and some people are hard rock and some people are country. That's the versatility that makes life great. So that's the beauty of our practice is moving into that space. All right. Anybody else? All right, good. We'll leave it there. And I appreciate you guys coming for me. I'm recording this, so I'm going to post it later. And for others who couldn't make it. And yeah, so I'll see you next week on Thursday at 11. Topic to be announced. We'll see.
Okay.
All
See
right,
you.
guys. All right, I appreciate you for tuning in.